For decades, China's deserts expanded like unstoppable oceans of sand, swallowing villages, roads, and farmland. Then, in a move that baffled experts, China began burying tons of dead plants beneath the dunes. 10 years later, the result is nothing short of extraordinary. What secret did this bold experiment unlock? And how could it change the fight against desertification forever? Stay with us, because what happened next will defy everything you thought possible. The desert that refused to stay still. On the western edge of China, the land is restless. The Taklamakan Desert, often called the Sea of Death, and the Tengger Desert to its east are not just static wastelands. They move. Each year, the dunes advance nearly 65 feet, swallowing fields, villages, and roads in silence. UNESCO has tracked their expansion like a slow-motion invasion, a creeping tide of sand, threatening to erase human settlements and choke fertile land. By the mid-20th century, Chinese planners knew they faced not just an environmental problem, but a civilizational threat. Desertification was already eating into croplands and forcing migrations. Entire regions teetered on the edge of becoming uninhabitable. The government's first response seemed obvious: plant trees, billions of them. Between 2016 and 2020 alone, China turned 21.7 million acres of degraded land green. By 2023, the tally of reforested land had grown to nearly 10 million more acres. Yet the numbers hid a sobering truth. Scientists from Beijing Forestry University discovered that 85% of the saplings never reached maturity. Their roots, planted in shifting sands, were either exposed to the air or buried beneath sudden avalanches of dust. For every tree that survived, dozens withered away. In the Taklamakan, the challenge was even sharper. Here, 80% of the desert was composed of mobile dunes, constantly rearranged by winds strong enough to scar faces and shred roofs. Sandstorms reached speeds that carried grains hundreds of miles, blanketing towns and cities in yellow haze. The ecological costs went hand in hand with human ones. Crops failed in bordering provinces, families abandoned homes, and trains halted when rails were buried. China's Green Wall project, once hailed as an ecological miracle, was in danger of becoming a Sisyphean struggle. Planting more trees could slow the desert's march for a time, but not forever. Officials realized they were playing a defensive game they could not win. That was when a different kind of thinking began to surface. Instead of relying on fragile saplings, what if the answer lay in something already considered worthless? China's agricultural system produced mountains of waste every year. When rice and wheat were harvested, the valuable ears were taken and the stalks left behind. This byproduct, known as straw, piled up across the country in staggering amounts. In 2024 alone, rice fields yielded more than 200 million tons of straw. If you added wheat, oats, and other crops, the figure climbed close to 1 billion tons. Normally, straw was either burned, fed to livestock, or left to decay. But what if it could be weaponized against the desert? For scientists, the idea was audacious. Take the dead remains of one harvest and use them to secure the soil for the next. Desert engineers began experimenting with straw in small, carefully measured squares. What they found was startling. Unlike living plants, straw did not wither in the wind. Buried in grids, it slowed the movement of sand. Its presence cooled the ground, trapped dust, and began to create microenvironments where seeds could later survive. Over time, even the decomposition of straw enriched the topsoil, turning empty dunes into the foundation of new ecosystems. The desert, long thought to be unstoppable, suddenly had an adversary that did not depend on fragile roots or rainfall. But how could something as simple as dried husks of rice and wheat alter the fate of deserts stretching thousands of miles? And more importantly, could the method scale from tiny patches to whole ecosystems? Stay with us to uncover the details. A dead plant becomes a living weapon. In the heart of China's agricultural heartlands, the solution to the desert's advance was hiding in plain sight. It wasn't a new technology or a breakthrough chemical compound. It was something farmers had long treated as waste, something piled in endless mounds after every harvest. Straw, brittle, lifeless stalks that once carried rice, wheat, and oats suddenly became the unlikely foundation of a bold desert experiment. To understand why, picture the scale of China's harvests. Vast fields, stretching to the horizon, generate not only the grain that feeds more than 1 billion people, but also mountains of leftover stalks. Each year, close to 1 billion tons of this material was produced across the country. Most of it was discarded, burned, or left to rot in the fields. Few imagined that this agricultural residue could one day be repurposed to fight one of Earth's most unforgiving landscapes. The breakthrough came when researchers began examining the properties of straw not as waste, but as an engineering material. Straw doesn't dissolve in dry sand, nor does it disintegrate quickly in harsh desert winds. Its structure, toughened by sun and time, can resist movement long enough to create friction against shifting particles. What began as a simple thought experiment evolved into a systematic plan. Bury straw in the desert in carefully arranged grids, forming patterns designed to confuse the wind. When the first test plots were laid out, the results startled the teams involved. The dunes, once rippling like waves in a storm, slowed their march. Pockets of stillness appeared where the sand no longer drifted freely. Over weeks, layers of dust accumulated inside the straw barriers, creating fertile islands of sediment. These were not yet green, but they were something new, stable ground where instability had reigned for centuries. The logic was simple but profound. If deserts could not be stopped outright, they could be tamed. Square by square, grid by grid, each checkerboard cell of straw, only a few feet across, became a micro-laboratory. Inside, conditions shifted. Temperatures at ground level dropped. Moisture lingered longer after rare rains. Seeds that would once have blown away were caught and held in place, shielded from the full fury of the wind. Over time, even microorganisms returned to the soil, slowly restoring life at the most basic level. The promise of this method extended beyond science. It was cheap, using what China already had in abundance. It was scalable, capable of expanding from a single experiment to vast tracts of land. And, unlike massive reforestation drives that demanded decades of patience, straw grids created immediate results. Even before new plants took root, the dunes themselves began to harden and quiet. The boldness of the strategy did not go unnoticed. Officials and scientists realized they weren't just fighting a local battle against desertification. They were pioneering a model that could be exported to other arid zones around the globe. Nations from North Africa to the Middle East, struggling with their own expanding deserts, began to study what was happening in Western China with growing interest. Some even sent delegations to observe the grids firsthand, hoping to replicate the success in their own fragile landscapes. But laying out straw in neat squares across endless dunes was only the beginning. Scientists still had to answer a deeper question. Would these dead plants eventually give rise to living ecosystems? Or would the checkerboards remain sterile scaffolds in the sand? Come with us to find out more. Grids that tricked the wind. From the air, the desert began to look different. No longer a boundless expanse of shifting dunes, it carried strange markings that resembled an enormous chessboard stretching toward the horizon. These were not accidents of nature. They were deliberate grids, lines of straw laid into the sand with geometric precision, designed to challenge the desert on its own terms. At first glance, the checkerboard patterns seemed almost artistic, but their purpose was rooted in hard science. Each square was a trap engineered to interrupt the desert's most destructive force, the wind. In an open dune field, gusts sweep across uninterrupted, lifting grains of sand into the air and carrying them miles away. But when confronted with the straw grids, that momentum fractured. Air currents slowed, particles dropped, and the surface calmed. Within weeks of their installation, the effects became visible. Dunes that once crept forward relentlessly were caught and held in place. Sand that had flowed like liquid began to pile up inside the grids, forming controlled pockets rather than chaotic drifts. Researchers measuring the ground recorded a staggering result. In some areas, the intensity of sand movement dropped by more than 99%. A landscape in constant motion had been forced, almost against its will, to stand still. The change extended beyond mere stability. Dust carried on the wind settled into the grids, enriching the trapped soil with organic particles that had drifted for miles. Each cell became a natural reservoir of nutrients, building up microscopic layers of fertility. The straw itself, left to decay under the desert sun, slowly transformed into organic matter, feeding the very environment it was placed to protect. What appeared to be lifeless scaffolding was, in fact, preparing the ground for new life. But perhaps the most unexpected outcome was biodiversity. Surveys conducted years after the first checkerboards were laid showed a marked difference between grid-covered dunes and untouched ones. Plant species that could never survive on bare, shifting sand began to take root. Hardy grasses emerged first, spreading quickly across the stabilized surface. Shrubs followed, their roots reaching deeper into the dunes. And in some areas, even resilient tree seedlings managed to stand against the wind. Scientists reported not only higher survival rates, but also a striking increase in the variety of species, each one contributing to the birth of a new desert ecosystem that seemed impossible only a decade earlier. The checkerboards did not transform dunes into fertile meadows overnight. Instead, they served as a slow but steady bridge between desolation and possibility. The straw barriers offered time for soil to accumulate, for roots to grip, and for life to adapt. For desert communities living on the edge of survival, this was more than just an ecological experiment. It was protection from the sands that once buried their fields, security from storms that used to rip through villages, and hope that abandoned lands could one day be restored. The sheer scale of the project left observers stunned. From orbiting satellites, western China appeared etched with pale lines in vast geometric grids, stretching farther than the eye could see. It was as though humans had carved determination into the surface of the earth, declaring their refusal to surrender to the desert. Unlike earlier measures that vanished under the first major storm, these grids endured, season after season, holding firm in the face of relentless winds. The success of the straw checkerboards highlighted a new challenge: finding a way to apply this strategy across China's vast deserts. Scaling it up would depend on developing machines capable of tackling the immense area. If small cells could tame a patch of sand, how could the process be expanded to cover thousands of square miles? Manual labor was not enough. The desert demanded something faster, stronger, and far more efficient. Stay here as we reveal everything. Machines that write on the desert. The desert was never kind to human hands. For years, workers bent under scorching suns, their bodies lined with dust, carving trenches into dunes to lay bundles of straw. The work was punishing, the progress slow, and yet millions of cells were stitched into the sand this way. But no matter how determined, people alone could not keep up with deserts that stretched wider than entire nations. The solution, once again, came not from nature, but from engineering. Enter the machines, designed not for cities or fields, but for the hostile emptiness of dunes. Unlike traditional farm equipment, these vehicles carried a singular purpose: to inscribe the desert with patterns strong enough to hold it still. They did not scatter seeds or till fertile soil. Instead, they carried coils of straw ropes, unspooling them across barren landscapes with unwavering precision. What once required teams of workers laboring for days could now be achieved in a fraction of the time. The new technology pressed straw into sand while simultaneously digging trenches and covering them. Each movement of the machine carved lines, anchored fibers, and sealed them beneath the shifting surface. A process that once consumed sweat and hours became automated, efficient, and astonishingly reliable. The efficiency gains were dramatic. Field tests showed that mechanized laying was up to 6 times faster than manual labor. More importantly, the ropes produced by factories lasted longer than hand-packed straw, up to 6 years in the sand before needing replacement. That endurance meant grids remained stable for nearly twice as long, giving seedlings and grasses a fighting chance to establish themselves in otherwise unforgiving terrain. The design was simple but brilliant. Instead of bundling loose straw into countless small squares, the ropes could be stretched in continuous lines, creating large grids in a single sweep. When researchers compared the new method with older, hand-laid checkerboards, the difference was obvious. Where workers had once inched forward, machines advanced across entire dunes in hours, leaving behind perfectly etched lattices that looked like signatures on the earth itself. Flexibility was another advantage. Some vehicles were built to operate fully autonomously, driving across dunes and laying ropes with little human guidance. Others were hybrid machines, requiring operators to guide them through particularly rough terrain. Even in remote areas unreachable by heavy machinery, portable devices were developed, hand tools that dug trenches faster than shovels, followed by machines that pressed straw into place. It was a spectrum of solutions, tailored to the varied realities of China's deserts. The impact was not just technical. For the first time, the idea of scaling straw grids to continental proportions became possible. Instead of workers painstakingly covering a few square miles a year, machines promised coverage on a scale that matched the size of the problem. In the battle against deserts, speed was not just an advantage, it was survival. But the story did not end with efficiency alone. These machines represented a turning point, showing that desert control could become an industry, not just a government program. Entire factories began producing straw ropes, specifically for grid projects. Specialized vehicles were rolled out to provinces bordering the largest dunes. The desert, long considered an enemy, was becoming a workplace, mapped, measured, and tamed by human design. Still, questions remained. Could these mechanical grids endure the same storms that had buried railways and roads in the past? Would the machines that carved order into chaos prove strong enough when nature tested them at full force? Come along as we uncover the hidden story. The railway that should have disappeared. In 1958, engineers stood at the edge of the Tengger Desert and were told they were chasing the impossible. The goal was to connect Baotou in Inner Mongolia with Lanzhou in Gansu by rail, a lifeline of steel that would run 615 miles across rugged country. But there was a problem that foreign experts were quick to point out. Nearly 90 miles of the planned track would cut straight through dunes that shifted like waves in a storm. In their view, this was madness. Within decades, they warned, the desert would swallow the line whole. China built it anyway, against skepticism, against warnings, and against the raw force of nature. Trains began running across the desert floor. Yet, the critics were not entirely wrong. The first years were brutal. Sandstorms swept across the tracks with terrifying speed, sometimes burying rails under several feet of drifting grains overnight. Locomotives had to halt until workers dug them free. In nearby towns, such as Zhongwei, winds carried so much sand that bowls of rice were covered before meals were finished. For the people who lived near the railway, the desert was not a backdrop, but a daily enemy. In those early years, builders tried everything. They laid down gravel to hold the dunes in place. They spread asphalt mats, hoping to create surfaces too heavy for the wind to move. They even experimented with covering areas of sand in fabric. Each method failed. Storms ripped away the barriers, scattering them as though they had never existed. The desert, it seemed, could not be persuaded by conventional means. Then, by chance, an answer appeared. During one storm, a laborer plunged a bundle of straw into the sand to keep it from blowing away. When the skies cleared, the ground was stripped bare, except for the spot where the straw stood. Around it, the sand had piled up instead of moving on. What seemed like an accident revealed a pattern. Unlike gravel or fabric, straw did not slide across dunes. It unanchored itself. The idea spread quickly among the crews. Soon, straw was being pressed into the sand systematically, not just by chance. What emerged was the earliest prototype of the checkerboard method that would later redefine desert control across China. The impact was immediate. Where the straw grids were laid, dunes lost their momentum. Tracks that had once required constant clearing began to stay open for longer stretches. Vegetation planted alongside the grids finally had a chance to grow, shielded from the worst of the winds. What had begun as a desperate improvisation became the foundation of a survival strategy for the railway itself. Over time, the transformation became undeniable. Predictions that the Baotou-Lanzhou line would vanish under sand proved spectacularly wrong. Decades later, the trains were still running, their steel wheels cutting across a desert that no longer behaved like an untamed sea. The checkerboard system grew into something more permanent. Desert-resistant shrubs and trees were planted within the straw barriers, creating living walls of green that further anchored the soil. The barren margins of the railway corridor gradually turned into patches of vegetation, reshaping the landscape into something future generations could inherit. Recognition followed. In 1988, the Desert Protection System built around the railway earned the Special Prize for National Science and Technology Progress. 6 years later, the Zhongwei Sand Fixation Forest Farm, which maintained the system, was included on the Global 500 list for environmental achievements. International observers called it nothing short of a miracle in the history of human efforts against sand. What had begun as an impossible dream became a model studied around the world. Nations with deserts of their own took note. Straw grids inspired projects from North Africa to Central Asia, proving that a single improvisation in a storm could echo across continents. The Baotou-Lanzhou Railway did more than link two cities. It showed that deserts could be challenged, and that human ingenuity could bend even the harshest landscapes to its will. But if straw saved a railway, could it also hold open a road across one of the deadliest deserts on Earth? Stay with us to uncover what comes next. Highways through the Sea of Death. On maps of Western China, one stretch of road stands out like a defiant scar across the emptiest of landscapes. It is the Taklamakan Highway, a 349-mile lifeline through what locals call the Sea of Death. For centuries, caravans avoided this desert, choosing to skirt its edges rather than risk crossing its interior. Legends spoke of traders swallowed by dunes, their skeletons buried with their goods. Even today, the Taklamakan is one of the harshest deserts on Earth, with 80% of its terrain covered by shifting sands. Attempting to build a road through its heart sounded like a gamble with nature itself. Yet, in the 1990s, China made the decision to push a highway directly across it. The logic was bold: connect distant oil fields and isolated towns by cutting straight through the desert's center. Engineers faced a task unlike any before them. Unlike stone mountains or rivers, sand could not be blasted, bridged, or tunneled. It was alive, restless, moving with every gust of wind. To pave a road here meant confronting an enemy that never stopped advancing. The early years of construction revealed the scale of the challenge. Asphalt laid 1 month could be buried the next. Entire sections vanished beneath dunes that moved faster than bulldozers could clear them. The road risked becoming another doomed attempt, a forgotten strip beneath the sands. But planners had one advantage their predecessors lacked: the lessons learned from straw grids. Alongside the new pavement, workers installed barriers of straw checkerboards, planting drought-resistant vegetation inside them. The strategy was not about eliminating the desert, but about controlling it just enough to allow passage. Slowly, kilometer by kilometer, the road began to hold. Vehicles that once would have bogged down in loose sand now sped across a black ribbon carved into the desert floor. The highway's protection system extended far beyond simple grids. Engineers combined multiple layers: gravel belts, wind fences, and even stone barriers, each reinforcing the other. Straw cells acted as the first line of defense, breaking the momentum of the wind. Vegetation grew in their shelter, strengthening the barrier over time. Gravel and stone provided additional weight, locking the system in place. What emerged was not just a road, but a complex fortress designed to withstand one of the most hostile climates on Earth. Travelers who make the journey today describe an otherworldly experience. Service stations, rare oases of human presence, punctuate the route, allowing drivers to rest and take in the strange beauty of endless dunes stretching to every horizon. The air shimmers with heat, and yet the road remains clear, a silent testament to human persistence. From satellites orbiting Earth, the highway appears like a single line etched defiantly across the desert's golden skin. Beyond its engineering triumph, the Taklamakan Highway carries immense symbolic weight. It demonstrated that deserts once written off as impassable could be crossed, connected, and even stabilized. It became proof that China's war against desertification was not confined to planting forests at the margins, but extended deep into the most forbidding interiors. Where nature once dictated the limits of movement, now human ingenuity had drawn new lines of possibility. The success of the project reverberated far beyond China's borders. Other nations battling advancing deserts, from the Sahel in Africa to the Middle East, began studying the techniques used in the Taklamakan. Straw grids, once seen as a local experiment, now stood as a global model for survival against shifting sands. What do you think is the true secret behind China's success? The checkerboard of straw grids, the machines carving patterns into the sand, or the forests that grew where nothing was meant to survive? Share your thoughts in the comments.